So we've moved to a different location in the presentation. It's sort of a tight little corner, but the smaller works, but there's actually a lot happening in this corner. So, and the reason why I like this corner is that it shows a lot of diversity of image, but then also, as Julio was pointing out, as we were moving over here, there's a diversity of media that also sort of represents, which we didn't talk about, but I told him we would get to later in this discussion, sort of his background, which is why he came to the United States, which was to study printmaking here in New York City. Yeah. And so he'll explain why these different media sort of echo the history of his teaching, his learnings here in New York. And because some of these are actually printmaking sort of techniques, but that he's sort of used as painting. Now, this image here is probably the most, or this painting is probably the most similar in terms of the other ones in this show that we've already talked about, which is that it is oil on linen, and it is the water imagery. It's obviously, and the reason why I wanted to kind of keep these kind of together and over here to talk about them is this is obviously distinctly somebody's sandaled feet, and the water was obviously shower water. It is.
It's a self-portrait in a way.
But it's that whole concept of what you were talking about. I mean, there's a gestalt about these things that you just sort of know. Oh, those are sandaled feet, even though they are not exactly a sandaled foot. And you can see how the image is even duplicated and what have you, because that's exactly what you see in water, is these reflections of parts of things. So in many ways, they're almost cubist in that you're seeing multiple views of the same thing at the same time in a single viewing. But in real time, not as an artist would, sort of fragment and mash up together. So. But that's why I thought this was really great, because it's also a slightly different palette, but that's again gets back to what we were talking about, the interesting thing about water, and the depth of the water really affects the color. Other things in the Caribbean, obviously, other things that are underwater, vegetation, what have you, affect the color. But that's what really is very interesting about water. Yeah. And I thought this was a good example. The other thing, too, that these do is this is something that kind of harkens back, and we'll talk about these two, I guess, just for a second here real quick, just as background. And what I want you to comment on is that it reminds me of some of your earlier work, and that wasn't necessarily the water series, and where you have this collaging of imagery, and some of it is a specific image or person to you, or something historical, or sort of more indigenous symbolism. And so it seems like you like to do that and collage these things and bring them into the conversation. You also tend to do that a lot with the water paintings. And part of it is that I think, like you were saying about this illusory, when you look and kind of get lost in looking at the water, you sort of get dreamlike, or maybe it brings back memories or whatever, and these things kind of come to you. And so that's what I think is kind of interesting about this series and about your work, is how you bring together all these layers of content or significance, culturally, historically, politically, into something seemingly simple, like a water painting.
Exactly.
And so nothing is straightforward, right?
Exactly.
But so why don't you kind of just go through the run through like you did for me and Yao, in terms of the medium and what each of these is, because it's very interesting, because this one's going to surprise people.
Yeah. Well, this particular one, you know how like there's a little bit of, as I was saying before, Baroque is the Baroque is a language of the Caribbean, and the Baroque culture, especially in literature and storytelling. But also, there's a little bit of pastiche thing, like a cliche kind of way, the way they decorate sometimes the interiors, like an echo of the things that came from Spain and Europe and France. And so these, I took one element of the water associated, like the conch, you said?
Yeah, like a conch shell.
Yeah, so it's like one of the shells, and then they're usually like orange and yellow and white, and I just switch the color code and repeat it, and by repeating it, creating a pattern, and giving a homage to the idea of nature, repetition, and patterning. But it becomes something else, and what you thought you knew, it becomes something else.
Right.
By really paying attention and doing something to it, and doing something else to it, and then then it looks like it could be flowers, lilies, or something, and then.
It almost looks vegetative.
Vegetarian, and so it came, and then and then it became very sensual, very, even like now that I see it, it reminds me like Georgia O'Keeffe kind of thing, which it has nothing to do with it. She was in the desert, and I was in the Caribbean, but that's what happened with contemporary art. I mean, you take something,
just nature,
and then works on it, but also the printmaker aspect of me also came into action here.
Because you said it's on rice paper.
Yeah, it's rice paper, and then it's mounted on linen, and then first the repetition is part of the printmaking thing, and collaging visually, and then it's I wanted to create. Remember, I was looking for very smooth surfaces, kind of cinematographic way where there's no interference, like a mirage, where there's it's just the image. And but it's oil, it's ink, and then it's oil on rice paper, ink and then it's on linen. So it's rendered in a way where there's a humility of the material, because it's not about a showing up. And then you see, like when I go like to a piece like this one, it's encaustic. Which is wax on panel. But underneath, I put a monotype. Started the image with a monotype, which is a one-off, painting on paper. Then I mounted onto a hard surface, a panel, in order to work on the hot molten wax, encaustics. Which is, encaustic is, like Jasper Johns started to revitalize with that targets and the flag paintings as encaustics. So it's been kind of, it's an ancient technique. Again, if you see the choice of technique, there's a juxtaposition between ancient techniques and contemporary surfaces. So my work is always that tension that you were mentioning at the beginning, where there's something very like nature-like, and it feels like the reverence to it, but then there's a tension on contemporary issues. And then this one, which is based on an image that I did before I started the war in paintings.
Really? Oh,
yeah, it's more, but then I retook it. What happened is I started a piece that it was for the MTA. It was all over the city. It was the poster program that they did. It's a large poster, like 50 by 36. And it was all over.
So you mean here
in New York? Yeah, in New York City,
yeah,
Metropolitan Transit Authority. Yeah, and it was in the book. There's an explanation of it. You'll see it. And they have the original in the headquarters and all that. But then when I started working on the series, I appropriated one of the elements, which was a silhouette of my son when he was about 3 years old, and then I integrated into all this wave and things that I was working on for the water. And it's oil on styrene, which is a commercial material for the advertising industry. Styrene plastic, it's a plastic. So I sand it a little bit, and then I work on it. And it gives you, again, that smoothness, but you can do a lot of layer into it, because I work with highly pigmented oils. And
so that's oil over the styrene.
Over styrene, and then on a wood panel. Gotcha. Yeah. Also, it has the archival thing that this is plastic. It's not like wood that is the wood is just a support. And then this one is a straight oil on linen. Which when I look at it now, you can see that it's very. It's like you look at this, it's completely abstract. Could be
anything.
Anything. You can go into Surratt or and then it reminds me a little bit of the Chuck Close way of working.
Yes.
With the
fragmentation.
With the fragmentation, but
it's almost like he's pixelating.
Like pixelating, But this was done naturally by nature, by the water, and seeing the sun. And it's interesting because when you look at it, this is the same place, Cayo Arenas, in the Dominican Republic. It's an island it's like a little sand dune that come out. It's the same place where you see, for instance, like these this piece.
Oh, okay.
Or
Yeah,
that
which
one.
are
You know, it's
more
just different takes in it.
of the blue and green.
And so there's so much to see and
But that's
to
the
explore.
thing. In fact, what's interesting is looking at that one painting that you just pointed to, which the camera's not picking up. People said you're not missing anything here, and we're doing the worst thing, talking about something that they can't see. But I'm just noticing it from a distance and at this angle. It's really interesting. It's like the water is sort of eddying, and you captured that, so that when you're flying over the water, a lot of times you look down, and you don't know what's causing it. It could be a bunch of sharks swirling around or something, or it could be, just some
just
sort
the
of
wind, just the wind.
undercurrent, or just the winds or something. But yeah, you manage to capture like this, that how the water just sort of swirls and eddies in places, but then beyond it is just this calm. And so, so these paintings really do have a lot of life, because there are several paintings that don't have any people or things in them. It's just the water, and some of it abuts up to the shore. And so you see these sort of things when you see just a little bit of the shore to give you a reference. So almost all of these are tethered to the island in some way, either by a person being in there, or just a snippet of the sand of the beach or something, just so you know that these
Gives you
aren't
an
out in
anchor.
the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
These are tethered to the island all the way around in some fashion. But yeah, no, I think this was a nice corner. Curatorially, it's just a nice corner because the works are a little bit more intimate. There's more detail. This one's actually not normally here. It's around the corner, but we brought it here for people just so that you could talk about them and juxtaposed. But I purposely brought these onto this side of the room because of the scale and the fact that the imagery is related but distinctly different, and you've sort of explained sort of why that is. And so we'll take probably one more look on the other side to comment, to show that painting that we were just talking about. So we'll pick this up on the other side.
Great.